We're going to continue on in section 1.2 and talk about different ways of classifying and storing data. Right, so before we get into our classifying and storing and kind of our different types of variables and things like that we're going to look at, first we're going to look at our sources of data. So when we're looking at sources of data, and this is going to be a concept again, and I'm going to say this throughout this entire first chapter, we're going to see it over and over again for the entire semester. Right, so populations versus samples. So a population, right, is a set of data that contains all of the information about everything or everything with respect to what we are studying. It is the bigger picture. Right? So as we're reading this sentence, right, what we want to focus on is this word all. If we're thinking population, we are thinking about all of our data. So it's a collection of data values that will ever occur in a group. It's often difficult to obtain all of this information. Right? So if we're focusing on trying to get information from everybody of a certain group, right, it can be difficult to get that information. So sometimes what we end up studying instead is something called a sample. Right? So our sample is a subset of the population being studied. Right? So it's going to be a smaller group. That smaller group is going to represent the population at large, and it is much easier to obtain this information from a smaller group than it is from the entire population. So in this first example, we're going to label each of the following as a sample or the population for the given scenario. Right? So for A, all students at South Suburban College versus all students taking math at South Suburban College. So what we want to look at is which is the larger group, which is the smaller group. Well, our larger group is going to be all students at South Suburban College. So in this case, that would be our population. And all students taking math, well, that's a subset. That's a smaller group. That is going to be our sample. Now if we then take all students at South Suburban and compare them to all community college students in Illinois, well, all of a sudden what was our population in our last example is now our sample, right? Because this is now the smaller group out of the two. This is now the subset, right? And the population is that larger group which we are drawing from. So as we're going through, just remember population means all, right? And our sample means our smaller group that we're looking at.